coming up.
Up until today, we'd been told that government payments to McKinsey were $100 million, but you've accounted for a number that's twice that amount. Can you tell me what the total amount of non-competitive contract payments were that were made to McKinsey?
In your report, Auditor General, on the SDTC, which the public knows as the NDP Liberal Green Slush Fund, you mentioned that 90 conflicts of interest of Liberal Prime Minister handpicked appointees were in a conflict of interest totaling $76 million, and that, am I right, they didn't follow conflict of interest rules?
Mm-hmm. My question to you is, on what dates were each of these three contracts awarded to McKinsey?
The CRTC was then made aware that the police were going to be applying or had applied for a search warrant, and a search warrant would be coming. In the meantime, they stated that the data had been deleted off the devices. In other words, they went to the owner of those devices, the CRTC did, knowing a warrant was coming, asked for permission, received permission, and then deleted evidence from devices that the RCMP were going to seize.
Auditor General, you mentioned the issue of adhering to standard conflicts of real and perceived conflicts. 5 of the 7 NDP Liberal appointees to the Green Slush Fund Board as
Point of order.
voted themselves money.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
The panel is from the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. I would like to welcome the Commissioner, Conrad von Fichtenstein, and then the Director of Advisory and Compliance, Lynn Robinson-Dalpay.
Our witnesses today from the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, Andrew Hayes, Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, Sami Hanush, Principal, Mathieu Lequin, Principal, and Nicholas Wales, Principal as well. Ms. Hogan, you'll begin with an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so you know, because it has 3 reports, it's a little longer than 5 minutes.
That is always not a problem, and I apologize for being so precise this time. Usually I just say you have the floor, and you do. So we will, of course, endeavor, and we will listen to you with bated breath. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate precision around numbers, Mr. Chair, so thank you. I am pleased to be here today to discuss the 3 reports that were just tabled in the House of Commons. I first want to acknowledge that we are gathered in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I will begin with our audit of professional services contracts. It looked at whether federal contracts awarded to McKinsey & Company between 2011 and 2023 complied with applicable policies and provided Canadians with value for money. These contracts spanned 20 federal organizations, including 10 Crown corporations. The total value of contracts awarded to McKinsey & Company during the period we reviewed totaled $209 million, of which about $200 million was spent. We found that the organizations awarding the contracts showed a frequent disregard for federal contracting and procurement policies and guidance. We also found that each organization's own practices often did not demonstrate value for money. The extent of non-compliance and risks for value for money varied across organizations. For example, in 10 of the 28 contracts that were awarded through a competitive process, we found that bid evaluations did not include enough information to support the selection of McKinsey & Company as the winning bidder.
The department did not challenge the organization requesting the contracts about whether the procurement strategy used was appropriate when multiple contracts were awarded to McKinsey & Company for a similar purpose and within a short period of time.
Audit focused on contracts awarded to McKinsey & Company. It highlights basic requirements and good practices that all federal organizations should follow when procuring professional services on behalf of the Government of Canada. Federal contracting and procurement policies exist to ensure fairness, transparency, and value for Canadians. But they only work if they are followed.
Mr. Barrett, you have 6 minutes. Please lead us off.
What did you find was the total amount paid to McKinsey?
During the period under audit, it was approximately $200 million that was spent on contracts awarded to McKinsey and Company.
Since the period of 2015 to the end of your audit period, what was the amount of money paid to McKinsey?
I'm going to look to Nick here, but I believe that before 2015, it was about $8.6 million. So the difference would be after that date. That's accurate?
That's right. So about 191 million.
191 million. So of the $200 million since Justin Trudeau's NDP Liberal government came to power, that's the accounting of that $200 million to their preferred supplier, McKinsey. Up until today, we'd been told that government payments to McKinsey were $100 million, but you've accounted for a number that's twice that amount. Can you tell me what the total amount of non-competitive contract payments were that were made to McKinsey?
Why is our number almost double? So we are the first organization looking into McKinsey contracts that can bring in the Crown Corporation. So prior to my audit, the Controller General's office asked all the internal audit departments to do work, and then the procurement ombuds as well did some work. Both can only do work on departments and agencies. And so the increase in contracts to McKinsey is by adding in the 10 Crown corporations. So that's what brought it to where it's at. There was about 71% of the contracts that were issued on a non-competitive basis. They represent 118 million of contract awards. For actual spend, I'll have to see if Nick has that number, or we might have to get back to you.
I don't have it to hand, but we can get back to you with that.
So can you just break that down, what it means to have a non-competitive?
Qu'est-ce que cela signifie, un contrat de gré à gré? Est-ce que les autres entreprises peuvent soumissionner, notamment dans les contrats qui sont à la McKinsey? Les règles d'approvisionnement encouragent un processus concurrentiel. Celui-ci aide à augmenter les chances d'optimisation des ressources. En revanche, les contrats de gré à gré sont autorisés. Il y a certaines exceptions, normalement lorsque le contrat est de faible valeur ou lorsqu'un seul fournisseur est en mesure de fournir le service ou s'il y a un besoin urgent. Ou alors, si un processus concurrentiel public n'est pas dans le meilleur intérêt. Chaque demande de contrat de gré à gré doit être correctement justifiée et dans ce cas-ci, ça ne l'a pas été. Vous avez dit 71 %? Oui, 71 % des 97 contrats qui ont été émis par les sociétés de la Couronne. Ce n'est donc pas une exception. Il semble que ce soit la règle plutôt que l'exception. 71 %, ce n'est pas une exception. Vous avez également mentionné le critère de faible valeur du contrat. Vous avez parlé de 17 millions, de 118 millions. Donc, il y a donc... maintenant, parlons de technologie de développement durable Canada. Nous avons entendu des témoignages de lanceurs d'alerte, du ministre responsable également. On a parlé d'un scandale du niveau du scandale des commandites. « 90 conflits d'intérêts ont été découverts. Quelle a donc été la valeur de ces contrats que vous avez découverts? Quand on a examiné la situation de la fondation de TDDC, nous avons trouvé des lacunes en matière de gouvernement et également la gouvernance des fonds publics. Les conflits d'intérêts ont été mal gérés. 59 millions de dollars ont été attribués à des contrats qui, à notre avis, étaient inadmissibles. Le chiffre que vous avez mentionné correspondait au chiffre de la fondation en termes de conflit d'intérêts, où un membre du conseil d'administration a participé aux discussions et a pu voter à des contrats auxquels il appartenait. Donc, cela ne veut pas dire que le contrat aurait été attribué, mais dans ce cas-là, il aurait dû y avoir récusation. Vous avez parlé de 76 millions de dollars attribués dans le cas des 90.
Point of order. Chair, yes. We haven't had interpretation for a while.
Les excuses.
I will continue to talk here. Could you let me know when you begin to hear my words in French? We need, obviously. Mr. Bird, I'll give you time to restart. Again, about 10, 15 seconds. Go ahead, in addition to the time you have.
With the 90 conflicts of interest that you uncovered, you talked about the $76 million that represents. That's conflicts of interest by directors that were handpicked by the Trudeau government, who then picked the remaining directors on the board. So these are insiders, and the insiders finding themselves in 90 cases of conflict of interest. You also mentioned, Madam Auditor General, $59 million in ineligible payments. Those are ones that didn't meet the criteria, didn't meet the rules of the contribution agreement between the government and the fund. You also found 37 terminated or canceled projects worth $154 million with $35 million spent. What happened to that money?
So this was one of those lapses in stewardship of public funds by the foundation. The foundation had a process in place to look at milestone monitoring, and there they found out that some organizations were submitting expenditures that were not eligible. Rightfully so, they canceled the contract. What was missing in the governance of these public funds is that the foundation should then have informed the federal government so that an adjustment could be made to future funding to the foundation, or that steps could be taken to recover those.
Was the money recovered? Was the money recovered?
That would be a question to ask the foundation. At times, they did reduce the funding received, but this is really a lapse in the board's oversight on managing prudent funds.
Thank you.
I'm going to focus my questions on combating cybercrime because that's certainly an area of concern in society and governments at all levels right now.
How is it possible that the procurement strategies that were undertaken, particularly the policies that create these procurement strategies, were structured or even altered when McKinsey and Company, prior to their bidding on these projects?
So out of the 97 contracts that we looked at, 6 of them appeared to be designed to suit or to favor McKinsey. And you can appreciate that when there's 20 organizations, almost every contract is a uniquely different story. So I'm going to try and keep it somewhat general. But I would tell you that in 4 of the competitive contracts, we found that there was a change in strategy that made it easier for McKinsey. So we're not saying that you can't change your procurement strategy, but that you need to really justify why you were changing a strategy to award a contract to a specific vendor. In 2 of those cases, we found that the procurement strategy was a competitive one, but that there were questions raised by bidders around the narrowness of certain criteria. We didn't see documentation about how those concerns were addressed. And then in the end, there was one bidder, and it was McKinsey who received the contract. So those are the cases where it looks like it was done to suit them. When you look at the National Master Standing Offer, we did find in a couple of cases that 2 departments waited almost a little over a year, actually, for the National Master Standing Offer to be available with McKinsey for benchmarking services, when there were other standing offers for benchmarking services that could have perhaps answered their needs. And so, again, it's about documenting why. When you're going to go non-competitive, why you're doing it. It's I can't underscore the importance of making that clear and transparent.
Thank you very much. Beginning our second round, Mr. Perkins.
In your report, Auditor General, on the SDTC, which the public knows as the NDP Liberal Green Slush Fund, you mentioned that 90 conflicts of interest of Liberal Prime Minister handpicked appointees were in a conflict of interest totaling $76 million, and that, am I right, they didn't follow conflict of interest rules?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that the foundation really poorly manages conflicts of interest in general.
I just hope you could stick
Yeah,
with it.
I'm going to stick tight. They don't have an effective system to maintain conflicts of interest or the mitigating measures. And we found 90 cases where their records showed that members of the board had declared a conflict of interest, were involved in a discussion, and then voted on awarding funding to a project. And that should not happen. So that violated their own policies for conflicts of interest.
So they did report them, because further on you also say there are 96 cases when directors declared conflict of interest that the department knew about. So are those 96 in addition to the 90?
So we found that there were 96 cases that were actually well done. It was declared, and the minutes of the meetings properly show that individuals had recused themselves. But there were 90 cases where that was not the case. And when we spoke with the members of the board in question, they either told us that they didn't have a conflict of interest or that they had.
So there's
had
186 cases where there's a conflict of interest.
Overall,
Yes.
I'm going to look to make sure
So
I'm
what's,
getting this right. Yes, overall.
what's the total of the two in dollar values? Because you only list 76 million for the group of 90. What's the total with the 96?
And the 96 were properly handled. So really what's concerning is the 90 that were not
They're all
properly
concerning.
handled.
Any conflict of interest is concerning. So the 90 was 76 million. How much is the 96 conflict of interest?
That's good to say. I don't have that number
Can you
off the top of
table
my
that?
hand. We'll have
Okay.
to get back to the
And
committee.
in every single case of the 186 conflicts of interest, in every single case, when that came to the board, because the board approves them all, there was a senior Department of Industry official present, correct?
So there was an assistant deputy minister that is an observer at the board meetings of the foundation.
So the answer is yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, over to Ms. Block.
Thank you very much. In your report, you reference National Master Standing Offers, otherwise known as NMSOs. It is my understanding that these are a common procurement tool used by a government when a unique or ongoing service is required by government departments as a way of providing certainty. Would that be a correct characterization?
Absolutely. A standing offer is meant to really be almost like a self-serve. Here are certain services or products that are regularly procured, and then a good price is put in a standing offer for departments, agencies, and crowns to then call up against.
Thank you very much. In this audit of McKinsey contracting, you found that the NMSO established by Public Services and Procurement for McKinsey was done through a non-competitive process for benchmarking services, and they did not provide proper justification. I think you mentioned that that happened in a number of contracts. I believe this calls into question whether it should have been established to begin with at all. Would you say that is accurate?
Well, I think the procurement rules allow for national master standing offers to either be put in place from a competitive process or a non-competitive process. Prior to the issuance of this NMSO for McKinsey, there were others that had been issued to other vendors on a non-competitive basis, and this one was done on a non-competitive basis as well. I found that Public Service and Procurement Canada's justification was really weak. Then the next step is when departments, agencies, or crowns use it, that each of them should have properly documented why choosing the McKinsey National Master Standing Offer versus another one where similar services might have been available.
Okay, thank you. So I know you didn't use these words, but the OPO said that there appeared to be clear favoritism when it came to how some of these contracts were structured. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would tell you that we found 6 instances where we thought that the process was designed to suit or favor McKinsey. So 6 out of 97.
So favoritism. So what we actually have here is a government setting up a pipeline to funnel tens of millions of dollars through a non-competitive process to one of their favorite companies, McKinsey.
question, Ms.
Would
Block,
you agree
please.
with that?
I would tell you that McKinsey represents 0.27% of the dollars spent by the federal public service on professional services contracts. And I think it's important to note that the government should properly document why contracts are needed, regardless of who they are issued to.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Chair, and thank you, Madam Auditor General. Again, I'm going to go back to an individual who has been intrinsic to this study, and that is Mr. Dominic Barton. I'm sure you're aware Mr. Dominic Barton is the former global international leader of McKinsey. Mr. Barton is also the Prime Minister's hand-picked appointed ambassador to China. Mr. Barton was also his chair of his Economic Advisory Committee. So the infiltration of McKinsey in this Liberal government runs deep, and it doesn't stop there. To go on, Dominic Barton attested himself in Government Operations Committee that he had dinner with the Deputy Prime Minister. We saw the Prime Minister warmly introduce Dominic Barton at an international event. Mr. Barton has also met with Katie Telford as well as Gerald Butts. So as I said, Mr. Dominic Barton, the former international head of McKinsey, is no stranger to this Liberal government. But on February 1st, 2023, Dominic Barton testified, not at this committee, but at Government Operations Committee, and he lied. He lied about attending a strategic meeting with the Canada Infrastructure Bank on June 23rd, 2020, when he was Canadian ambassador to China. And today is confirmed in your report that the Canada Infrastructure Bank received not 1, not 2, but 3 contracts from McKinsey, with McKinsey. So, Madam Auditor General, my question to you is, on what dates were each of these 3 contracts awarded to McKinsey?
I'm going to have to get back to you on the specifics of dates. I don't have that level of information on all 97 contracts at my fingertips today.
Okay. Please ensure that you do that, because determining those dates will be very interesting to corroborate with the previous testimony that we have from Mr. Barton, where we have seen that he has lied before to a parliamentary committee. And I would not put him past him to find that these dates corroborate with his implication with both McKinsey as well as the Liberal government. I also think it's important to point out, you mentioned in your report the SDC and defense wait times of 1 year. I can't help but wonder if Mr. Barton's implication has something to do with that as well as the contracting chains. And with that, I'll pass my time over to Mr. Caputo.
Thank you, Ms. Kuzi, and thank you for being here. Madam Auditor General, I want to direct your attention to 7.46 and 7.47, those paragraphs in your report, speaking about cybercrime. Specifically, I want to ask you about the fact that it appears that the CRTC had seized devices in relation to an anti-spam investigation. And on those devices was evidence of another offense unrelated to the anti-spam investigation. Am I correct so far?
Yes, you're correct in that the CRTC seized devices as they were investigating an allegation against the anti-spam legislation. During that investigation, they uncovered that a law enforcement agency had a criminal investigation ongoing. I do not know the nature of that criminal investigation.
So it was a separate criminal investigation, and the CRTC provided digital evidence to the law enforcement organization. And the CRTC was then made aware that the police were going to be applying or had applied for a search warrant, and a search warrant would be coming. In the meantime, they stated that the data had been deleted off the devices. In other words, they went to the owner of those devices, the CRTC did, knowing a warrant was coming, asked for permission, received permission, and then deleted evidence from devices that the RCMP were going to seize pursuant to a warrant before the police obtained the warrant. Is that accurate?
Yeah, the CRTC was informed of the possibility of being served with a warrant after they had provided the electronic information to law enforcement. In an expedited fashion, they did accelerate cleaning the devices or deleting the contents of the devices and returning them. The incorrect information they provided to law enforcement was around the timing. When they had told them that the devices had been wiped, that had not yet occurred.
So not only were they incorrect or lied, they actually deleted evidence that would be seized. Now, can your office please provide this committee with all communications from the CRTC in relation to that, including all individuals and their titles who were involved?
Mr. Chair, we can provide that information. I believe that Mr. Hayes would like to.
Sure, I want to say a few words in that.
One clarification: it was the Granby Police, not the RCMP, that we were talking about in the report there. Although we did not name that organization, and yes, we will provide you with the information that we can on the individuals involved in the documents that we have.
Thank you very much.
It sounds like it could
Thank
be
you. Thank you very much,
obstruction of justice,
Mr. Caputo.
so thank you.
That is the time, unfortunately.
Your report makes it clear that rules were not followed adequately during the awarding of professional service contracts, and some of my colleagues have focused their questioning on the awarding of contracts to McKinsey. Can you please remind us again the percentage of dollars that went to McKinsey?
So when you look at the bucket of professional services that McKinsey provided and compare it to the spend across the public service for professional services contracts, McKinsey accounts for 0.27% of that spend.
Madam Auditor General, can you please fill Canadians in as to the nature of the Trans Mountain contract, please?
Mm-hmm. So there was a contract issued by Trans Mountain Corporation to McKinsey and Company to provide advice on operations, sort of monthly how to be more efficient and how to save money. That contract was issued on a non-competitive basis. It did not have a limit, but they expected that they would spend about $19 million. To date, they have spent $32 million on that contract.
Thank you. And who is the minister that signed that contract, please?
I don't believe that contract was signed by a minister. We only saw one contract where a minister had to authorize the approval of it, given that it exceeded the thresholds that the public service could authorize, but that was not this contract.
Thank you. I will pass my time to Mr. Perkins.
Auditor General, you mentioned the issue of adhering to standard conflicts of real and perceived conflicts. 5 of the 7 NDP Liberal appointees to the Green Slush Fund Board as
Point of order.
voted themselves money.
I find it misleading to suggest that the NDP in any way appointed these individuals, and I think the Auditor General can confirm that.
Point of debate, I would suggest, since Mr. Perkins is on the clock, he just laser focusing on his question here.
I'll start again. The appointments that were made.
You have 45 seconds.
The appointments that were made by the Liberal government with the support of the NDP to the Green Slush Fund, 5 of the 7 directors, as a group, voted themselves 186 times money for companies they own in the conflict of interest. Isn't the easiest way to avoid a conflict of interest to not have the organization, the government organization you're representing or being on the board of, not do business with your companies?
So I guess I would talk a bit about how the board members were appointed to the foundation. Half of them are appointed by the. I'm gonna get to the answer. Half of them are appointed through the governor in council process, which is supposed to be a process that's independent. We did not look at that.
Okay, order. Or Mr. Perkins, Mr. Perkins. We're listening to the auditor. There'll be no more interruptions. There'll be other opportunities if you're unsatisfied with the answers, but we find Ms. Hogan does get to the point. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor, and your time is expired. This is extra time that I'm giving to Ms. Hogan to respond to your question. Mr. Perkins, if you're not interested in a response, I will move on. There's a fair bit of chirping coming 2 ways. Ms. Hogan, you have the floor, please.
So the other half of the board of directors are appointed by this member council, and they're supposed to represent the Canadian population and the industry. So I think when you have that composition of a board of directors, it is likely that you will see conflicts of interest, which is why it is so important, if you want the expertise of the industry at the table, that you have a good process to manage conflicts of interest. And what we found here is that the foundation did not have that. And in 90 cases, their records showed that members of the board had declared a conflict of interest and voted on giving funding, and that should not have happened.